you who are not familiar with Campbell, or who are familiar with Campbell McGrath's work, you know his subjects are grand, and the scope of his poems and books follows suit. It's not uncommon to be reading along in one of his collections and find big blocks of densely conceived quotations from Wittgenstein or lines from Whitman. We read his poems in reference to what he's been reading, and it's a wonderful challenge. Campbell asks us to consider human nature, economics, place, the sublime, all manner of Floridian flora and fauna, while at the same time, we keep finding ourselves at the beach in a 7-Eleven or holding a can of Schaefer. Campbell McGrath's poetry collections include 7 notebooks, Capitalism, Spring Comes to Chicago, and most recently, In the Kingdom of the Sea Monkeys. His awards include the Kingsley Tufts Prize and fellowships from the Guggenheim and MacArthur Foundations. He teaches in the creative writing program at Florida International University in Miami. We at Smartish have been fortunate enough to publish his poems in our magazine, and we're grateful for his past participation in Poets Q&A. We're longtime admirers of his work, and we're really excited to have him with us today. Please join me in welcoming Campbell McGrath.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Stefan. I've been a long-time admirer of Smartish Pace and all the work these guys have been doing. And in fact, we've been trying to put a reading like this together for at least 6 or 7 years, with one thing usually on my end, causing it to fall apart every time. So I'm very glad to actually have made it this time and to be here in Baltimore. I'm going to read probably 10 poems, maybe give or take 1 or 2, and just because Piotr started with a poem called Baltimore, I'm going to start with a poem called Baltimore. That's in my new book that just came out. It's kind of it's a prose poem, maybe in a fragmented prose form. Baltimore. From the window, on a perfect August day, the great shade trees are unmoved. Only the uncountable susurrations of their million-fold leaves betraying the breeze in its passage. Roses in bloom, creepers climbing the porch railings, morning glory transforming the hedge into a vast, amorphous caterpillar of violet blossoms. Some robins on the lawn hunting worms, 2 squirrels, an unabashed rabbit venturing out from its den within the ancient azalea bush. The surface of the planet seethes with fellow creatures. Their kinship touches a peculiar nerve, a spot not far from where art resides, primitive, cognizant of the animal nature of the species, the cave where Pan must once have lived, or still does. And from the treetops, the oceanic chorus of cicadas, described by Whitman as rising and falling like brass quoits. Specimen days, as they all are, wings pinned, chloroformed in glass vials, cataloged for display in the dusty museum cases of time. Chirp of some warbler, distant traffic, rumble of bass and drums from the all-day music festival at the racetrack, where the teenagers in tie-dye and belly-button rings themselves resemble birds engaged in inscrutable mating rituals. For blocks around, concert-goers fill the streets, stoned or trippy on the day's sweet blue sky vibe, little kids selling bottled water from red coolers, guys with knockoff sunglasses and t-shirts, the big grills set up on traffic islands for crab cakes and barbecue ribs. The song the cicadas are singing, they will sing throughout the brief weeks of their lives, exultant imagos mating in the high branches, and a new generation will emerge from freshly laid eggs and burrow underground, ant-like grubs, wingless nymphs subsisting for the next 17 years on fluids sucked from tree roots, with only that promise to help them endure their long transitional dream state, that memory or fragrance, a sunlit dance of green leaves in wind, that paradisal fragment of sensory data imprinted deep within their genes, only that song, like quoits, to lead them out of darkness. poem's called Books. Books live in the mind like honey inside a beehive, that ambrosial archive, each volume sealed in craft-made paper, nutritive cells, stamen fragrant, snug as apothecary jars. Like fossilized trilobites or skulls in a torchlit catacomb beneath an ancient city, Byzantium or Ecbatana, or Paris at the end of April when vendors set their folding tables filled with lily of the valley beside every metro entrance, and the women coming home from work or market, scented already with the fugitive perfume of muguets, carry hand-held bouquets like pale tapers through the radiant, rain-washed streets at sunset. And then it is night, half the world ruled by dreams from which arise narrative forms, riddles, fables, myths. As mist lifts from mountain valleys in autumn, as steam belches from fumaroles in benthic trenches to whose sulfuric cones strange life forms cling. Chrome green crabs and eyeless shrimp, soft-legged starfish sung to sleep by that curious cousin of the hippopotamus, the whale, who, having first evolved from ocean to land in the ever-eventful Cretaceous, thought better of it, returning after millions of years to scholarly contemplation in the mesomorphic, metaphysical library of the sea. All American poets are children, metaphorically, of Emily Dickinson and Walt Whitman, who provide very convenient parental figures for us. And this poem is called Emily and Walt, and it simply takes that metaphor and literalizes it. Emily and Walt. I suppose we did not want for love. They were considerate parents, if a bit aloof, or more than a bit. He was a colossus of enthusiasms, none of them us. While she kissed our heads and mended socks with a wistful, faraway look, she might have been a little, well, daft. And he, allons, my little ones, he'd laugh and then leave without us. And those friends of his. Anyway, he's gone off to discover himself in San Francisco or wherever, while she's retired to the condo in Boca. We worry, but she says she likes it in Florida. She seems almost happy. I suppose they were less caregivers than enablers. They taught by example, reading for hours in the drafty house, and now the house is ours, with its drawers full of junk and odd lines of verse, and stairs that ascend to God knows where, belfries and gymnasia, the chapel, the workshop, aviaries, atria. We could never hope to fill it all. Our voices are too small for its silences, too thin to spawn an echo. Sometimes, even now, when the night wind blows into the chimney flue, I start from my bed, calling out, "Hello, Mom and Dad? Is that you?" There's a lot of poems in this book about poetry, and I'll read you a sample from another one of those. This is a poem called Notes on the Poem. It's really got kind of a little sequence. There's a bunch of little sequences of poems. I'm going to read a couple of the poems from Notes on the Poem. The first one is called The Foghorn. The poem one is writing is like a racehorse, running at a pace partially of one's choosing, partially a function of conditions on the racecourse, and partially determined by the horse's breeding. But the poem one is about to start, the poem one is going to write immediately, very soon, perhaps next March, is like a foghorn calling mournfully in the night. If only the moon would concede its guilt and come to heel like an obedient dog. If only the horse could transform into a yacht. If only the poet were a sailor or fog. And this is called The Poem. Maybe the poem will be strong as an ox and carry us all the way home. Maybe the poem will be small as a mole, a field mouse hidden in a meadow. Maybe the poem will sing like a whale. Maybe the poem will turn into a frog when kissed. Maybe it will be soft as mist, mysterious as fog, as white as snow. The wind will blow, but the poem will not falter. It is solid as a rock, hard as ice, fit as a fiddle, true blue. Maybe the poem will catch a chill, take ill, grow old and frail, fear death. Maybe it will elude the hunters one more year, but every poem draws a final inhale of breath. This one's called Wolves. Often I feel as if I've forgotten how to write at all, how to construct or dream or locate a poem, and how, if found, to befriend it. Where are you, little poem? Be careful, little poem. The forest is full of wolves. But then I trace my way back, slowly, carefully, as along an ocean cliff in the darkness, treading barefoot on sandy stones and dune grass, alone with the long, bitter moaning of the sea. This one's called California Love Song. To ride the Ferris wheel on a winter night in Santa Monica, playing nostalgic songs on a marine harmonica, thinking about the past, thinking about everything Los Angeles has ever meant to me, is that too much to ask? To kiss on the calliope and uproot world tyranny and strum a rhythm guitar Ron Wood would envy, to long for the lost, to love what lasts, to sing idolatrous praises to the stars, is that too much to ask? Arm in arm to gallivant, to lark, to crow, to bask in a wigwam of circus-colored atomic smog, to quaff a plastic cup of Nepenthian eggnog over one more round of boardwalk skee-ball, to trade my ocean for a waterfall, to live with you or not at all. Is that too much to ask? Just looking around to see if my friend Ed showed up, but since he didn't, I'm not going to read a poem to him. But I don't hold it against him. He has other things on his mind. This poem is called Vice President of Pants. And the story behind this poem is the following. I have a friend in Miami who's, I knew for a long time, worked for a clothing manufacturer. I knew he was a high executive, but I found out that his actual job title was Vice President of Pants. I only found this out in a newspaper article that was about how people were taking pay cuts during the recession. The article revealing what his salary was, and it was so preposterously high, even after the pay cuts, as to kind of be laughable. And then the upshot of that story is Vice President of Pants is obviously a kind of silly sounding job title. But in telling him that this poem existed and kind of apologizing for having written the poem with his job title, he said, well, that's not my title anymore, I got promoted. And his new, and again, these are all true stories, his new title is President of Men's Bottoms. Anyway, this is Vice President of Pants. Vice President of Pants turns out to be my friend Marvin's job title at a local clothing manufacturer, as I learned from a recent newspaper article about victims of the downturn. Though even after some serious erosion, his paycheck rolls enough bi-weekly zeros to belie whatever expectations you may have harbored about those who toil in the vineyards of leisure wear. And I can't help but envy the director of knee socks and the undersecretary of ascots, and wonder whether the alcalde of Guayaberas might be hiring an assistant sometime soon. Because in all honesty, this poetry gig is like feeding chocolate donuts to a hungry tiger or planting sunflowers on the moon. I'm going to read one more from this new book, and then I'm going to read a couple older poems and then maybe one new poem. And this one is called Sugar or Blood. In the kitchen, Elizabeth has been making marmalade with the luxurious crop of our lemon tree. And from my desk, I can almost taste the caramelizing essence of citrus rind and vanilla beans and burnt sugar. And I can hear the piano concerto by Mozart she is listening to, which sounds like a pavilion constructed from lemon-tinted panes of sugar glass. And the Zairian music I'm listening to is like a tessellated and betasseled tapestry thrown upon the floor of a nomad's tent. and the sands of the Sahara continue their migration to the time-worn grasslands of the Sahel, and the Virunga volcanoes comprise a fog-shouldered heaven to the last families of mountain gorillas awaking before dawn, shy, Herculean versions of ourselves, brothers from a simpler dream, luminous and transient as meteors. There will come no more into this world when we have killed the last of them. So many spools of golden sorrow to unwind, so much pathos to weave upon a loom of human agency. As if we were not ourselves baboons on the savannah, not jackals, not giraffes in our ungainliness. As if to desire the coat of a jaguar, the fur of a snow leopard, was not a form of worship, as raw ore minted and coined resembles the child's flattering imitation of a mastery it will never equal. Who would not be a great cat in the Amazon or the Hindu Kush? Even the greenish pelt of a river monk, its iridescent aura, even our two human bodies shimmer with the weird atomic eclipse light of life. Talking to myself like this, in a blazon and an emblem, I realize I have never said plainly most of what I truly believe. I have shied from difficulty and misstated my deepest fears. I have not borne full witness to the suffering in the streets of the cities I love. I have not walked a picket line against the tyranny of greed. I have been wily and evasive even on behalf of art. I have not praised the movies in tones equal to the rapture I have known there. I cannot remember King Lear. I did not finish Ulysses or even start on Proust. Even now I seek diversion in the candy necklace of delight. Even now I refuse to commit. Even now I would walk among jaguars, wearing the skin of a jaguar, as if it were not necessary to declare my allegiance, as if I did not have to choose. Which will it be, sugar or blood? I'm going to read a couple older poems, as I say, and then end with one or two new ones. And I'm going to read a poem called Wild Thing from my book American Noise. This is a request from Dean Smith. There are a couple poetry and baseball fans. Gene's here, and Stephanie's one too. And I've really been sadly remiss in writing baseball poems for a long time. Gene is always trying to kind of goad me into writing more. But this is a long time ago. And it's called Wild Thing. And that Wild Thing is a reference to Mitch Williams, former Phillies reliever, but most famously a Cubs reliever. And I lived in Chicago at the time. And Mitch Williams was the closer of the Cubs. And the closer only has one job, is to not sacrifice. You just can't screw up. You have to close the game down. And the irony of Mitch Williams was he was famous as the closer who was very erratic. Who basically, almost by definition, in other words, was bad at his job. And it struck me that death is the real closer, and death is not erratic in the way that Mitch Williams was. The poem kind of grew out of this strange recognition, really. Wild Thing. I will be forever 19. Driving a white Impala convertible down the Pacific Coast Highway while the radio plays nothing but my favorite songs. I will live among the wild men of Borneo, drink boar's blood, watch the slow dance of planets through my bamboo telescope. I will alter the consciousness of the free world, shake the philosophical foundations of Western civilization while dating Vanna White. I will rock the Roxy and the Ritz, ride the rails, roam center field for the Cubs. I will rise and shine, I will reign, I will rule, believe me. Alas, life is poor preparation for death. All those years of practice for the grand event that never happens. No flute recital for the masses, no squash game with God. In such matters, our short-sightedness is fundamental. History is a wave and we surf it beautifully, carving the face, shredding the curl of that perfectly marbled breaker spiced with essential stoke, or so we imagine. But before this wave came others, and beyond it lies a veritable ocean of rills and wavelets and mighty tsunamis we failed to notice, our eyes so full of spray, blinded by the tingling sensations of the moment, as if time were a force field or energized aura, a second skin like gravity or desire, that by its very nature constricts our vision, contains us as a pig's intestine stuffed with pork and anise by some overwrought Italian butcher. How else could Elizabeth continue to wear those shoes, those black-buckled high tops, combat boots for elves, which will so clearly seem an utter embarrassment in the photo album 20 years from now. My God, look what I wore in the 90s. That was funny at the time, so it was only the 80s when I was writing the poem, so it was a future reference. It's now sadly dated. How else to explain the statue of Ceres atop the Board of Trade, elegantly appropriate but left without a face, unfinished, because they didn't think the city would ever grow tall enough to notice? And don't we all recognize that blank expression? Don't we each cherish our unique and individual nature? Every paper cut or broken heart, the first, the most severe. Each vow or resolution, the mark of some brave new beginning. No two snowflakes are exactly alike, but every fucking snowflake is pretty much the same. Every life a variation on a theme of suffering and meaninglessness, full of distractions, frisbees, beautiful trees, girls in orange sandals. In fact, the distractions are the main event. There is no grace period, no warm-up tosses or preseason schedule. The game has not only begun, it's the top of the ninth inning, and you still haven't scored. A shutout. The world has pitched a shutout against your life. For all your slick manipulations of that magic bat, you're deep in the hole that counts against you. Your net result is a fat string of goose eggs hung like loops of fresh kielbasa from the rafters. And time is running out. We're into the 7th. Now it's the 8th and the lights are coming on. The fans are clapping with nervous anticipation. Look, out in the bullpen, he's warming up. The main man, the big guy, the stopper, the ace. What about those dreams, your hopes for the future? To plumb the depths of the Marianas Trench in a gilded bathysphere. To write the epic masterworks of greed and heroism and love. To build a house with your own 2 hands in the hills outside of Santa Fe and raise up chickens and dogs and a family there. The jet ski, the guitar lessons, the macrame. Hey, I'd better get serious, get something going before it's too late. It is too late. Bottom of the 9th, 2 gone. They've given the signal and he's entering the game. He's coming in to face you. He's making his way slowly across the grass. The inexorable closer is coming. Believe me, it isn't Mitch Williams. It's a really funny thing to write a poem and then the whole poem of which is pitched to a last line which is about some totally ephemeral piece of pop culture information. I don't know if it's a really good thing to do or just a really strangely self-defeating thing to do. I can't really decide. It's a thing I have done on more than one occasion. We'll read another kind of death-oriented poem. I'm not sure what that's all about. Actually, it's a baseball-oriented poem. This poem is called Then. It's about kind of imagining what happens after death. But it was because of the realization I said, this is really about this. I said, but if you died, you would never know if the Orioles ever successfully rebuilt the team and got good. And then I said, oh, that would be the worst thing about dying, was you'd miss out on all these narratives that you've been consciously and unconsciously engaged in. Will the city's rebuilding project be successful? Literally, will the Orioles ever, will the new pitchers ever turn out to be good instead of, washed up already? So this poem's just called Then. What happens then, after the stars explode, after the universe expands to the limits of possibility, after the bones of the last animals disappear into the plains and melt into dirt and rise up as corn, rise up as grass billowing in autumn winds that carry the soil back to the sea as the oceans boil away and the galaxies recoil into a swirling matter and the earth becomes a single ripple, a single integer in that equation. What happens then? How does the story turn out? The social narratives in many languages, the striving cultures, new definitions of justice, new plans for a rebuilt city, leaders and followers, a championship season, plots and dramas we each have played our small part in, our domestic sentence, our phrase or motif, our single character, ampersand or cue, whichever shape our being has pressed into the ledger of time. What happens after our works have all been forgotten, the paintings lost, the architecture collapsed, when the last books have fallen into the sea to be consumed by whales, digested by shrimp and minnows, when our music no longer echoes and lampreys alone read the poetry of humanity in the dim library of the deep? What happens after the body fails, after the noise of the blood falls still, the lungs grow stiff, after the white bird ascends from the marsh at dawn to escort the soul to the borders of this realm, the day, the hour, the moment after, what happens then? What happens then? I'm going to read, I think, 2 more poems. And this poem I'm going to read from Florida Poems is because someone just told me that somebody who was on YouTube, that somebody was reading this poem at Occupy Wall Street. They had a poetry day, and so he read this poem. I said, oh, that's cool, because it was a little kind of political parable. I wasn't sure anybody ever knew that. It's called the Strangler Fig. And the Strangler Fig, I live in South Florida, it's a tree that takes root in another tree, then sends down trailers to the ground, and eventually ends up entirely encompassing and taking over the body of the tree that supported it until that original tree dies and the strangler fig is left alone. So it's called the Strangler Fig. Masters, we adore you, each and all. We praise in you a generosity of spirit, dreamt of but unknown among our kind. We are weak while you are strong. Oak and palm and ruby-figured gumbo limbo, the profligate ficus, among whose lordly roots a toehold may be granted the needy, noblesse oblige. In your shadows we grow dependent. Let us lean upon you, grant us lenience. Let us gather the crumbs from your table until the cords of our temple are noosed and the pillars of your hearth cast down, and the manners you have labored to create, beloved masters, yield to the extravagant vengeance of the risen. I'm going to read a new poem. I'm going to read 2 new poems. These are new as in beyond my new book. And where are they? They're in my folder. And one is a, well, no, I'm just going to read one poem. Otherwise that one's a little long-winded. It's a new poem called Pentatina for 5 Vowels. And a pentatina, if you're a poet here, you probably know what a sestina is, and it's a poetic form devised on the number 6. The pentatina is like sestina, only less so. It's built around the number 5. So it's 5 stanzas of 5 lines each. And it has 5 repeating end words, but the end words actually occur at the front of the line rather than the end of the line. And also, since there are 5 vowels, each of the 5 stanzas rhymes on one of the vowel sounds. Pentatina for 5 vowels. Today is a trumpet to set the hounds baying. The past is a fox, the hunters are flaying. Nothing unspoken goes without saying. Love's a casino where lovers risk playing. The future's a marker, our hearts are prepaying. The future's a promise, there's no guaranteeing. Today is a fire, the field mice are fleeing. Love is a marriage of feeling and being. The past is a mirror for wishful sightseeing. Nothing goes missing without absenteeing. Nothing gets cloven except by dividing. The future is chosen by atoms colliding. The past's an elision forever eliding. Today is a fog bank in which I am hiding. Love is a burn forever debriding. Love's an ascent forever plateauing. Nothing is granted except by bestowing. Today is an anthem, the cuckoos are crowing. The future is a convolute river on-flowing. The past is a lawn, the neighbor is mowing. The past is an answer not worth pursuing. Nothing gets done except by the doing. The future is a climax forever ensuing. Love is only won by wooing. Today is a truce between reaping and ruing. Thank you very much.
Sure.